Welcome to Night Radios, where every story is a soft whisper, and every whisper leads you gently into sleep. Let the world fade away just for a while. Tonight, I have a story just for you. Have you ever wondered what happens to the things we forget, or the ones that forget themselves? Tonight, a lonely suitcase with no name takes a journey through skies without maps, in search of something it doesn't even know it's missing. But what it finds might just change how you see yourself. Before we begin this quiet adventure, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more meaningful stories, just like this one. There is a place most maps don't bother to mention. It doesn't exist during the day, and no one talks about it much. Not because it's a secret, but because it only arrives when the world is quiet enough to listen. In the heart of a sleeping forest, where the trees lean slightly toward each other as if whispering old stories, the station appears like a sigh. Just past midnight, beneath a sky brushed with stars that seem unsure whether to stay or fade, the whispering station stirs into being. It doesn't creak or clang into existence. It just settles, like mist gathering in the corners of a dream. The platform is made of smooth wood worn silver by moonlight, and the planks always feel slightly warm, like someone just stepped off. There's no sign above it, no glowing letters or timetable posted. But if you happen to stand there, the wind sometimes hums in a rhythm that feels almost like a name. Tonight, the air carries the scent of damp pine needles and something faintly sweet, like a forgotten memory folded inside a drawer. Moonlight hangs low, not cold or distant, but close, gentle enough to light the platform without waking anything. An owl calls out once from the edge of the trees. It's not a cry. It sounds more like a question, or maybe a signal. That's when the suitcase appears. Not with a flash, not carried by anyone, just there, near the edge of the platform, beside an old wooden bench dusted in moss. It's small, no taller than a child's knees, and scuffed on every corner. The leather is faded to a soft greyish brown, and the handle sags as if tired of being lifted. There's no tag, no ribbon, no initials pressed into its side. Just a single wooden button holding it shut, a little cracked around the edges. The suitcase doesn't move, of course, but if you looked closely, you might feel something about it, like it was waiting or listening, as though it was hoping someone would finally come looking for it, even if it didn't quite believe they would. It doesn't remember being carried here. In fact, it's not sure it was ever carried at all. Maybe it was left. Maybe it wandered. Maybe it's been here all along and only just realized it. It has no memories inside it, at least none it can reach. Just a sense of having once held something important, something warm, something that mattered. And now, sitting there beneath the trembling branches and moon-dappled shadows, the suitcase wonders what to do next. It doesn't know where it's supposed to go, or if it's meant to go anywhere at all. Its thoughts are quiet things. They don't shout. They ripple gently, like the surface of a lake, stirred by a breeze. If I don't have a name, the suitcase thinks, do I still deserve a journey? It looks around, but no one answers. The forest holds its breath. The bench doesn't creak. The owl is gone now, or maybe just watching silently. Minutes pass like leaves falling, soft and slow, unnoticed until you look down. A train whistle doesn't sound. Instead, there's a shimmer, barely more than a ripple of air. and the tracks begin to glow faintly, stretching forward and backward into places that don't appear on any map. Somewhere, something large and quiet is approaching. The suitcase feels it, not in the ground beneath it, but in the way the night begins to lean forward, like the whole world is listening. And perhaps, in some distant, tucked-away corner of its fabric, the suitcase feels something stir, not a memory exactly, more like readiness. It doesn't know where the train will go, but it knows this: it's time. And even without a name, maybe that's enough. The night lingered like a hush wrapped in velvet. Shadows stretched gently across the platform as the suitcase sat quietly, its corners just barely brushing the edge of the wooden planks. It didn't fidget or fuss, but if someone had looked closely, they might have noticed a kind of stillness that wasn't quite peace, more like the waiting that happens when you're not sure if you're forgotten or simply in the wrong place. The wind moved through the trees in soft waves, brushing over pine needles and gathering whispers along the way. Each gust felt like a question that didn't quite expect an answer. The suitcase listened, to the rustling above, to the soft creak of the old bench, to the quiet thrum of something just beneath the surface of the world. What am I? The suitcase wondered. It didn't expect anyone to respond, and no one did. Am I empty? It tried to remember what was inside. There might have been something once, a photograph, a scarf, a letter folded twice. But now, all it could find was the echo of weight, like a shelf that remembers holding books even after they're gone. Or maybe I'm full, it thought, and I've just forgotten with time. The suitcase imagined a hand once wrapping around its handle, fingers that held it gently but with purpose. But no face came to mind, no footsteps, no voice calling its name. Do I even have a name? It wondered. A faint vibration tickled through the platform, almost too soft to notice. The air shifted in a way that made the pine trees lean slightly, and that's when the suitcase became aware of the others. They weren't people, they weren't even moving. To the left sat a cracked porcelain teacup, resting neatly on a folded cloth that smelled faintly of lavender. It tilted slightly, as if mid-conversation with someone who had just stepped out. Nearby, a pale green kite lay folded on itself. Its string was tangled, and one corner had been mended with a child's sticker, faded but still smiling. It looked like it hadn't flown in a long time, yet still carried wind in its shape. Behind them, an old umbrella leaned in the crook of the bench. The fabric was torn in one place, and a dried leaf had tucked itself inside the handle like a note meant to be found. None of them moved, none spoke, but the suitcase felt them. It felt the space they held, like pauses in a story waiting for the next word. We're all waiting for something, they seemed to say, even if we don't know what. The platform grew quieter, if that was possible. The wind paused, as if it, too, was listening. And then, from somewhere beyond the trees, a bell rang. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It sounded like something soft being remembered, like the chime of an old clock in a house no longer lived in. The sound didn't grow louder. It drifted closer. Lights, gentle and golden, not harsh, began to line the tracks, one by one, in no particular hurry. They didn't blink or flash. They just arrived, like guests who knew they were welcome. Then came the train. It didn't announce itself with steam or squealing wheels. Instead, it glided across the tracks with the softness of snowfall, its wheels singing in a tone only the night could hum. The cars were old, but not forgotten. Their windows glowed like lanterns, and the woodwork shimmered as if polished by years of starlight. When it stopped, the doors didn't clang open, they exhaled. A single figure stepped down, neither tall nor short, not shadowed nor bright. The figure wasn't made of smoke or light, but something in between. Not quite male, not quite female, not quite anything but presence. The voice came warm and close, ready to board. The suitcase hesitated. It wanted to say yes. It wanted to know where the train was going, but it had no map, no destination, no ticket, and, most of all, no certainty that it belonged. "But I don't know where I'm going," the suitcase replied, its wooden clasp trembling ever so slightly. The figure tilted its head, a motion as calm as the moon slipping behind a cloud. "Then you're exactly where you need to be." The suitcase didn't know why those words felt like a blanket being tucked around it, but they did. It rose slightly, just enough to feel its own weight again, and with a quiet breath the wind might have carried, it rolled toward the open door. The train didn't cheer or blink or welcome it with noise. It simply waited, patient, as though it had always expected this one small, quiet arrival. Inside, the suitcase would find neither answers nor instructions, not yet. But what it did find was a seat that seemed made for its shape, and a window that offered nothing but stars. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. The suitcase was the first to board that night, though it wouldn't have known that. The train didn't announce arrivals or set times. It simply opened when it was ready and moved when it pleased, like an old friend who trusted you to keep pace. Inside, the light was soft, dim enough not to wake anything fragile, but clear enough to see the shape of things. It wasn't the kind of brightness that buzzed. It felt more like the warm glow you find behind closed curtains in a quiet house during a gentle rain. There were no rows of seats, no signs that told you where to sit or how long to stay. Instead, the cabin stretched in slow, uneven turns, with alcoves carved into the walls like old library corners or attic nooks that someone once decorated with care and forgot to take down. The suitcase was guided down the narrow passageway by someone, or rather, something, it hadn't quite seen until now. The figure didn't have arms, not really. It moved like a breeze slipping through fabric, and it smelled faintly of rosemary and pine needles. Its steps didn't fall but brushed, like the touch of a hem across a floor. This was the wind attendant. The wind attendant didn't speak, but its presence wrapped around the suitcase like a well-folded blanket. It led the suitcase to a velvet seat tucked between a window and a curved wall. The cushion was already warm. A soft scarf had been fluffed into a makeshift pillow, and a thin woolen throw had been left waiting, just in case. The suitcase settled in, or rather, was settled in. It didn't resist. Around the cabin, other passengers sat quietly in their own corners. To the right, a lantern flickered dimly, its glass worn in places, the flame inside twitching as if remembering something it couldn't quite say. It gave off only the faintest warmth, not enough to light the room, just enough to feel less alone. Across the way, an umbrella, furled and damp, leaned against the window ledge. A single raindrop still clung to its tip, refusing to fall. It looked as though it had once weathered something heavy and was now resting from the effort of staying open for too long. Further down, there was a mirror, narrow and tall, wrapped carefully in cloth. Only the base of the stand showed, carved in swirls, painted in a chipped pale blue. Whatever lay beneath the fabric chose not to be seen, or perhaps had grown tired of seeing. None of them moved. None of them asked questions or gave answers. But the hush between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like respect, like the sort of silence that only forms between those who've known a weight they can't quite name. The train itself moved without sound, without tremble. It glided, not in a straight line, but in a path that curved and swayed, like it was following a song you couldn't hear but somehow recognized. Outside the wide windows, the world passed by slowly. Trees lined the tracks, tall and calm, their branches lifting slightly as if bowing in time. The hills rolled gently, folded in on themselves like cats curled in sleep. Above it all, stars blinked, not in any hurry to shine or fade, just observing. The suitcase rested into the curve of the seat, letting its thoughts drift. It didn't know the names of the other passengers. It didn't know their stories or what they carried, or even if they carried anything at all. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a reason to be afraid. Something in the way the lantern breathed, in the stillness of the umbrella, in the quiet of the mirror, something about it all felt familiar, as though their silence mirrored its own, not in emptiness, but in understanding. The suitcase turned slightly toward the window, its corners relaxing just enough to feel the velvet beneath it. Maybe I don't need to talk to be understood, it thought. And though no one replied, the scarf fell just a little more snugly around its side. Far off, in the rhythm of the tracks, the train hummed a tune that didn't need words, and the suitcase, still nameless, still uncertain, closed its eyes, not to sleep, but to feel what it was like to simply be carried. At some hour that didn't quite belong to night or morning, the train began to slow, not with a screech or jolt, but with a kind of exhale, as if it had remembered something it wanted to revisit. The lights along the cabin dimmed, and the windows grew brighter, not from sunlight, but from a glow that drifted outside the train like golden dust on warm air. Through the glass, the suitcase could see something waiting in the sky. Floating gently just above a stretch of cotton-colored mist was a small workshop. It looked like it had been built from leftover pieces of memory. Wood panels the color of faded honey, chimneys that breathed out whispers instead of smoke, and wind chimes that spun without wind. Perched on top, like a weather vane shaped by dreams, was a little brass owl whose wings turned slowly with the rhythm of time. The train came to a careful pause. From the far end of the car, the wind attendant moved without footsteps. It traveled along the aisle like a breeze that knew every corner, and when it reached the door, it opened it with a hush. Waiting just outside was a figure, tall and still, holding nothing but presence. His name was Theo, though no one on the train said it aloud. He was known only by what he did, and what he no longer needed to do. Theo was the clockmaker. He didn't look young or old. His beard was soft and silver, the kind that had grown slowly over time, as if it wanted to be gentle with him. His coat was long, buttoned high at the neck, and the sleeves were rolled just enough to show the dark lines of time etched into his hands. His eyes stayed closed, not out of weariness, but because they had long ago decided they were not the best way to read the world. The wind attendant offered no words, only a nod of air, and Theo stepped aboard. He moved slowly, but not uncertainly. His fingers glided across the handrail, over the back of a seat, and along the edge of the table, as if counting something only he could feel. He stopped in front of the suitcase. The suitcase didn't flinch. If anything, it leaned slightly forward, as though something inside it had recognized him. Theo sat down across from it without hesitation. He reached into his coat and took out a pocket watch, its silver face worn smooth, its chain wrapped twice around his palm. He held it gently, the way someone might hold a photograph of someone they missed. "This one doesn't tick," he said, barely above a whisper, "but it still holds time." The suitcase didn't know what to say. It wasn't sure if it was allowed to ask questions, but something inside stirred. Something curious, something small but alive. "How can something matter?" the suitcase asked slowly, "if it doesn't work anymore?" Theo turned the watch in his hand once, then placed it softly on the velvet between them. "Because even silence," he said, "can hold a memory. And even broken things know how to keep the beat of what once was." He reached forward, not quickly, not forcefully, and rested his fingertips on the suitcase's surface. His touch was careful, not because the suitcase was fragile, but because Theo understood the language of careful things. His hands didn't open the suitcase, they just rested and listened. "You're carrying more than you think," Theo said gently. "But not everything needs to be unpacked. Some things, they open only when remembered, and even then, only if you're kind." The suitcase felt something shift deep within. It wasn't pain. It wasn't joy. It was a soft reshaping, like a crease smoothing out in an old blanket, long untouched. Theo let his hand fall back to his lap. He stood slowly, wrapping the watch's chain back around his fingers. He didn't offer advice or comfort or even a goodbye. Instead, as the wind attendant returned to his side, he turned his head ever so slightly toward the window and said one final thing. "Time doesn't move in straight lines. It curls like steam and sometimes folds itself inside you." Then, without sound, he stepped off the train. The door closed behind him like the turning of a page, and the train, once again, began to glide forward, its rhythm soft but changed. Somewhere between night and morning, when shadows stretch longer but light never quite spills in, the train glided into something softer than a stop. It was more like an arrival that didn't need a name, just a pause to let something gentle happen. Outside the window, the world had changed again. The rails now cut through a vast floating garden, but not the kind with flowers or fountains. This garden was made entirely of leaves, not raked or gathered in piles, but drifting, curling mid-air, falling upward and downward all at once. Golds, ambers, crimsons, the kind of colors you only see in dreams or right before you forget them. Each leaf carried its own weight, but none of them seemed heavy. As the train slowed, one figure stood alone among the rustling canopy, as still as a statue but wrapped in motion. Her shawl shimmered in the half-light, woven from what looked like woven dusk and old lullabies. Her name wasn't spoken, but everyone on the train seemed to know who she was. Even the wheels turned quieter for her. She stepped on with the patience of someone who had never been in a hurry. In her arms, she held a wide willow basket filled with folded leaves. Some were shaped like tiny ships, their edges gently curled as if they had sailed through wind. Others looked like birds, mid-flight, wings caught forever in their first upward motion. A few were folded tight, small and square, like little letters never mailed. The autumn lady moved down the cabin with ease, her presence calming the air as if the train itself took a slower breath. She found the seat beside the suitcase without needing to look, and without a sound, settled into it as if she had always been meant to arrive exactly at that moment. For a while, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hands worked slowly, precisely, folding one leaf, then another. She pressed each fold with a fingertip, tracing a line as delicate as a memory. She wasn't decorating. She was composing, making something fragile for the sake of beauty, even if it wouldn't last. The suitcase watched in silence. Each crease, each fold, stirred something deep in its lining. An old feeling, like the whisper of handwriting on paper it no longer held. After what felt like many minutes, or perhaps just a few quiet heartbeats, the suitcase found itself asking, not with boldness, but with quiet need, "What do you do with those?" The autumn lady didn't pause. She kept folding, but her smile arrived like a breeze between trees. "I send them to people who forgot what they once felt," she said. Her voice was low and warm, the kind of voice that made you want to listen carefully even when you weren't sure why. "Memories don't live forever," she continued, "but their colors can still return. You'd be surprised how many people need to remember the shape of something they've let go." She held up a newly folded leaf, a small boat with a single curled mast, and placed it carefully into the basket beside the others. "They're not meant to stay, just to visit." Then she reached down and selected one of the more delicate folds, a single red maple leaf, pressed flat and smooth. She shaped it gently, no bigger than a coin, and pressed it between her palms. When she opened them, it was a letter. Not sealed, not written, but warm, as if it had absorbed something private from her hands. She offered it to the suitcase. "Don't open it now," she said. The suitcase hesitated. "Not even a peek?" it asked, unsure why it felt so drawn to something it couldn't see inside. She shook her head, her earrings, small silver feathers, catching the dim light. "When the time is brittle," she said, "it will know when to unfold." The suitcase accepted the leaf without asking more. As it rested the folded memory on its side, something shifted within. A rustle, faint but familiar, like the sound of paper sliding across skin. It wasn't a full memory, but it was the beginning of one. A warmth curled in its center. Not heat, but the tender kind of warmth you feel when you remember a name whispered in the dark, or the last line of a letter you never quite finished reading. The autumn lady didn't say another word. She continued folding, her fingers moving like the rhythm of old stories told by heart. Outside, the leaves swirled around the train again. They didn't fall, exactly. They danced, ... And as the train began to move once more, the basket beside her filled slowly, not with weight, but with whispers ready to return to the world. Night returned slowly, as it often did on this train, never rushing, never darkening all at once. Instead, it folded itself in around the windows, pressing gently like a wool coat drawn close at the collar. The stars outside were fewer now, tucked behind a curtain of pale mist. The train moved through a valley of soft fog, the kind that made the trees blur into shadows and the moon dissolve into a silver blur overhead. Inside, the cabin was hushed. The autumn lady had left with the breeze, her basket of folded leaves trailing the scent of dry earth and memory. The suitcase rested alone once more, though it no longer felt quite as alone as it once had. Something warm still lingered at its seams, the kind of warmth that came from being seen without needing to be explained. Then came the tap. It was barely a sound, just a small, uncertain tick against the window pane. The sort of thing you might miss if you weren't already listening. But the suitcase was listening. Tap, then again, a soft scratch, like a whisper from outside. The wind attendant was already moving, quiet, seamless, attentive as always. It drifted toward the glass, where a tiny shape hovered uncertainly in the misted light. The window eased open with a slow breath, and a small figure slipped inside. It was a firefly. But not like the ones you might see dancing above summer grass. This one looked tired. Its wings were thin and slightly frayed, like parchment held too long in the rain. Its glow, if it still had one, was gone. Its body carried the shimmer of something that once gleamed but now only remembered how. The wind attendant guided it gently toward the velvet seat, and the firefly, without a sound, curled up beside the suitcase like a pebble seeking warmth. The suitcase, unsure whether to speak, finally did. "You don't glow." The firefly didn't lift its head. Its voice was small but steady. "I did once. I used it all trying to light someone else's way." There was no pride in the answer, no sorrow either, just a simple truth, laid down like a worn coat on a bench. The suitcase paused. It let the firefly's words settle in. Then it said, quietly, "I don't even know if I have anything to give." The firefly gave a tired chirp, something between a sigh and a chuckle. "You let me rest," it said. "That's something, that's light." For a long time, neither of them said another word. Outside, the fog drifted in slow waves. Inside, the lamps overhead dimmed slightly, not from loss of power, but in respect, like a stage giving space for something more important to unfold. The suitcase didn't understand everything the firefly meant, but it felt something inside shift, not sharply, not suddenly, more like the way snow melts from the inside out, unnoticed until it begins to drip. It wasn't a glow, not exactly, but from deep within its lining, a warmth began to fall, not bright, not showy, just a faint, steady hum, like the very idea of hope curling into shape. The firefly nestled closer, its wings still. The train carried on through the mist, its motion steady and kind. No fanfare, no announcement, just quietness shared between two things that once believed they had nothing left to offer. And in that quiet, something small and beautiful began to return. The train had been drifting peacefully through the sky, cradled by clouds and surrounded by stars that blinked like sleepy eyes. Each mile felt like a lullaby. Even the fog that lingered from earlier had thinned into threads of silver that floated without weight. But something shifted. It began with a strange stillness. Not the calm that comes before rest, but the kind that presses too hard against your skin, like air that doesn't know what to hold. The clouds outside grew thicker, their edges fraying, curling in confusion. They no longer moved in graceful waves, but swirled in restless spirals, as if unsure of where they were meant to be. The wind attendant, who had been gently swaying near the window, paused mid-drift, no longer breezy, no longer soothing. It stood suspended, listening to something the others couldn't yet hear. The hum of the train, once as steady as a heartbeat, softened into a hush. Then the storm arrived. It did not come with thunder or rain. There was no crack of lightning, no howling wind. Instead, it arrived like memory breaking loose. Loose pages began to fall from the sky. Scraps of journals, torn book corners, envelopes never opened. Names drifted past the windows, written in old cursive, some smudged, some crossed out. Pieces of music curled through the air, notes half-formed, lyrics unfinished. Voices whispered fragments of goodbyes that never made it to the end. The train trembled, not violently, but deeply, like something remembering a sorrow it had tried very hard to forget. Inside the cabin, light flickered and dimmed. The lantern across the aisle pulsed once, then sat still. The mirror stayed wrapped, but a fine crack stretched just beneath the cloth, quiet as breath. The suitcase, resting in its seat, felt the shift before it understood it. A weightless pressure pushed at its side, as if the storm was not trying to knock it over, but invite it out. There was no time to grip the seat, no warning, just a sudden tilt of the train, and then the door, once closed tight, stood slightly ajar, opened by a gust that didn't feel like wind at all. The suitcase tumbled gently, as if caught in a memory itself. It slid across the velvet, past the edge of the doorway, and out into the air. But it didn't fall like something heavy. It didn't crash or spin. It floated down, slow and soft, like a feather remembering how to descend. Below, there was no station, no platform, just a wide, endless field covered in snow as smooth as paper and just as blank. The suitcase landed without a sound. There was no impact, no jolt, just contact, quiet, complete. Around it, the world had gone silent. The sky held no stars now. The clouds had faded into the color of breath held too long. The snow didn't sparkle. It just lay still, waiting. No train, no firefly, no scarf folded into a pillow or leaf folded into a letter. Just absence. The suitcase sat for a moment, unsure what it was supposed to do when no one was watching. It tried to listen, but there was nothing to hear. Not even the wind. It curled into itself. Not physically, but somewhere deeper, at the hinges, at the clasp, as if closing tighter might help it stay whole. Maybe I was never meant to go anywhere after all. The thought didn't come bitterly. It arrived like an echo, soft, tired, and maybe true. The suitcase sat there, small against the blankness, barely visible in the endless quiet. And above, where the train had passed only moments before, the sky began to forget again. The snow did not fall. It simply existed, already settled, as though the world had been paused mid-sigh. No wind moved it. No marks disturbed its smoothness. The silence held everything together like thread pulled snug around a story not yet finished. The suitcase remained where it had landed, a quiet figure in a white field that had no beginning or end. There was no direction to face, no shadow to follow. Even the sky above had lost its motion, holding only the softest hint of light without giving it away. Then came the sound. The suitcase remained where it had landed, a quiet figure in a white field that had no beginning or end. There was no direction to face, no shadow to follow. Even the sky above had lost its motion, holding only the softest hint of light without giving it away. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, not sharp, not even rhythmic. It was the soft crunch of snow beneath something too careful to disturb it. Not footsteps in the usual sense, more like echoes from long ago, returning slowly and gently, so as not to frighten what had been forgotten. From the pale distance, a figure emerged. He wore white, not the kind of white that gleams, but the sort that blends, the shade of birch bark and breath caught in winter air. His beard hung long and soft, touched with frost that never melted, and his coat looked heavy but kind. In his left hand, he carried a small kettle that steamed without heat. Snow gathered at his feet, but never touched him. He said nothing. He wore white. Not the kind of white that gleams, but the sort that blends, the shade of birch bark and breath caught in winter air. His beard hung long and soft, touched with frost that never melted, and his coat looked heavy but kind. In his left hand, he carried a small kettle that steamed without heat. Snow gathered at his feet, but never touched him. He said nothing. He walked until he reached the suitcase, then bent with a grace that belonged to someone who had sat beside many things that did not speak. Slowly, he took one of his wool gloves and placed it gently atop the suitcase. Still, no words. But the suitcase, which had grown so used to the quiet of abandonment, sensed something different now. This was not the silence of being forgotten. This was the kind of silence that made room. The figure, known only as the Winter Elder, lowered himself to the ground. From the sleeve of his coat, he drew a single snowflake, perfectly formed and glowing faintly from within. He held it in his palm, pressed 2 fingers against it, and it sparked, not with fire, but with stillness. A glow emerged, soft and blue, curling like breath around a candle's first light. The flame hovered just between them. He did not warm his hands by it. He only watched it dance. And then, slowly, the hum began. It wasn't a melody. It didn't follow notes or keys. It moved the way breathing does when done without thinking, in and out, gentle and sure. The kind of sound that reminded bones they could rest. The suitcase, curled tightly in its own thoughts, found courage to speak. "Why am I still here?" The elder didn't lift his eyes. He only smiled, a quiet, upward motion of his cheeks, as though he had been waiting for the question. "You did not fall," he said. "You were placed. Some journeys must pause so the heart can catch up." He set the kettle in the snow and pulled out 2 tiny cups, each carved from ice that somehow never melted. He poured from the kettle into both, though no steam rose. He handed one to the suitcase without expecting hands to receive it. The gesture alone was enough. "Even stillness has warmth," he said, "if you sit beside it long enough." They remained like that for some time, not drinking, not speaking, but sharing the air between them. The snow didn't melt, the wind didn't come back, but something began to ease. Inside the suitcase, a weight shifted, not heaviness, not burden. More like the feeling of an unopened book being touched by hands that meant to read, not just carry. The night pressed on, quiet and unmoving, and the Winter Elder hummed until the flame in the snow began to dim, not extinguished, only resting. When the hum faded, he did not rise. He simply nodded toward the suitcase, as if to say, "Now is the time." And the suitcase remembered the letter. Tucked safely within its folds was the gift from the autumn lady. A single leaf, folded like a note, carried gently through time. The suitcase had not dared open it. Not then, but now, in this white field, something about the moment felt brittle enough. Slowly, the suitcase opened. Inside was no ink, no written words. Only a single petal, pressed flat, still carrying a blush of pink that refused to fade. It smelled of something familiar, something quiet and kind. A song hummed once before sleep, a voice that called without needing to be answered. The suitcase did not remember a name, but it remembered being held, not clearly, not sharply, but truly. It trembled, not from cold, but from something warmer than it knew how to name. The memory had no pictures, just feeling, just presence. You don't need to know where you came from to know that you are loved, the winter elder said softly, ... The suitcase, for the first time in its journey, responded without hesitation. I thought I was empty, it whispered, but I was just waiting to be opened the right way. The elder gave no answer. He simply watched the sky begin to shift, not brighter, not morning, but something softer than either. The snow began to change, not melting, but loosening, as if it, too, had heard something worth remembering. The sky didn't brighten, and morning didn't arrive in the way it usually does, but something shifted. The light overhead turned less silver, more soft. The air held warmth without changing its temperature, and the snow, so still and untouched before, began to lose its sharpness. It softened around the edges, not melting, just loosening like it had exhaled. The suitcase sat quietly beside the dimmed flame the winter elder had left. Its corners no longer curled inward. The quiet no longer stung. It didn't feel abandoned here, only paused ... It had not noticed when the winter elder slipped away. There was no farewell, just an absence that did not feel like loss, only permission. The suitcase had not moved since, but something inside had. A steady, quiet warmth had formed in the place where only questions used to sit. Not heat, not light, just a kind of gentle pressure, like a hand resting on your back when you don't even realize you're trembling. And then, with no ceremony, it remembered the letter. The one folded from a leaf, passed gently from the autumn lady's basket, tucked safely and silently inside its lining ... The suitcase didn't hurry, it didn't fumble. It opened the compartment with the patience of someone turning the page of a book they'd been afraid to finish. The leaf was still there, smooth, crisp, warm from the memory it carried. It didn't unfold all at once. Its folds resisted slightly at first, like it needed a second to be sure. Then, slowly, the creases opened. Inside, resting flat and quiet, was a single petal. It wasn't bright. Its pink hue was soft, the color of things long loved and gently worn. The edges were a little frayed, the way fabric softens over time, but it was whole. The scent it released was immediate, though faint, like the whisper of a song from a different room. It smelled like something the suitcase couldn't name, but felt deep in its seams. A smell like warm linen, like honey left on fingertips, like the hush that follows laughter. And with the scent came the feeling. It didn't arrive as a picture. There was no face, no voice, no moment to replay. Just the unmistakable sense of having been held, not carried, not moved, but held, with care, with stillness, with love. The suitcase didn't know whose arms, didn't know when, but the feeling was true as snow resting on pine branches, as true as firelight that dances even when no one's watching. A breath formed inside its frame, though it had no lungs. A tremble moved through it, though it had no bones. The feeling wrapped around its clasp, like a thread pulling through something that had once unraveled. Then came a voice, not from memory, but from the space just beside it. The winter elder was back, seated again without sound. He didn't ask what the suitcase had found. He didn't look inside. He simply said, You don't need to know where you came from to know that you are loved. The suitcase, still trembling, still feeling the warmth of that petal blooming inside its frame, managed words it hadn't known it had. I thought I was empty, it whispered, but I was just waiting to be opened the right way. The elder nodded, his eyes quiet with knowing. Around them, the snow continued to soften, not into slush, not into water, but into something pliable, something willing to move again. The wind stirred for the first time in what felt like forever, not as a gust, not even as a breeze, but as the breath of a world that had paused and was now ready to continue. The flame flickered once more, not too warm, just to remind. The winter elder left without sound. There was no wave, no backward glance, just a soft imprint where he'd sat, barely denting the snow. It held his shape for only a moment, then returned to smoothness, as if even his absence knew how to be gentle. The suitcase remained still. But the stillness felt different now. It wasn't the tight, curled-in sort that came from loneliness or fear. It was a stillness that made room. Like when a room is finally quiet enough for you to hear your own breath, or when a book is closed, not because the story is finished, but because something inside has settled. There were no stars overhead, yet the sky seemed to glow faintly from within itself. The snow no longer felt cold. It didn't melt, but it softened beneath the suitcase, the way old pillows do when they remember the shape of a head that once rested there. Then, without any command or signal, something stirred deep inside the suitcase. It wasn't a flash or flare, not like the way lamps burn. It was more like a pulse, a steady, soft thrum, a rhythm that hummed gently through its frame, lighting it not with fire, but with something quieter. It was not a glow anyone else might see from a distance, but up close, it was undeniable. The suitcase didn't panic. It didn't question the warmth. For once, it didn't doubt it belonged. From just beyond the edge of the snowfield, the fog lifted. And with it came a small shape, fluttering low, delicate wings, still a little frayed at the tips. The firefly returned. It wasn't brighter. It didn't glow as it once had, but it flew without wobble, and its presence was steady, not searching. "You called me," it said, settling onto the snow beside the suitcase. "Did I?" the suitcase asked. The firefly gave a soft flicker that wasn't quite a laugh, but carried the shape of one. "Not with words," it said, "but I heard you." It curled beside the suitcase, folding its wings like pages after a long read. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The light inside the suitcase continued to pulse, quiet even, sure. From far away, a new sound crept in. Not the sharp cry of an engine or whistle, but a long, low breath. The kind the train made when it was ready, when it had been waiting for just the right moment. Across the snow, lights began to appear one by one, not flickering but glowing with soft persistence. And then the train, familiar and slow, like an old friend returning with no need to explain where it had gone. It rolled into view with deliberate grace, its windows warm with golden light, the cabin already prepared. It made no announcement, it simply arrived. The wind attendant stepped down once more, its form as fluid as ever, cloak billowing slightly as it bowed, not out of formality, but of respect. The suitcase didn't need help climbing aboard. It moved with intention now, no longer just cargo, no longer something to be carried. It paused for a moment at the door, as if to feel the weight of this re-entry. The firefly hovered beside it, then darted ahead into the cabin like it had always belonged there. The wind attendant watched the suitcase with the calm of someone who sees things become whole again. And then, as the suitcase settled into its seat, the hum inside it continued. Not louder, not brighter, just present. It didn't know its name, didn't know its final destination, but for the first time, it understood that none of that made it less real. It wasn't empty, it wasn't lost, it was a part of the journey, and in the soft glow within its seams, something timeless flickered, the gentle certainty of being enough. The train didn't turn around. It didn't retrace its path or return to where it had first appeared. That wasn't its way. It simply kept moving forward, though forward meant something different in a place that followed neither maps nor clocks. The tracks didn't straighten. They softened, curved like rivers, guided by something more intuitive than direction. And then, as the glow of night began to settle into a paler kind of hush, the train slowed. There was no station this time, no platform, no crowd waiting. Just a small wooden house, tucked at the edge of a forest that wasn't drawn on any chart. It leaned slightly to one side, like it had grown tired of standing perfectly upright. Ivy brushed its porch rails, moss softened its steps. Above the door, an old wind chime made from mismatched silverware swayed in the still air, making music too soft to hum. Only one window was lit. It wasn't bright, just enough golden light to spill gently onto the snow-dusted sill. The kind of glow that comes from a single lamp, left on not because someone forgot to turn it off, but because someone hoped they'd be found. Inside the room, a child lay in bed, eyes open, quiet, still. They weren't restless. Not quite, but sleep hadn't arrived either. One hand rested on the edge of a blanket. The other held a piece of paper, creased in places, folded, then opened again. It wasn't a story, not yet. Just a few words, scratched out and started over. A letter that didn't know how to end. It had been written for someone no longer there, or maybe still there, but not the same. The child stared at the page for a long time. Outside, the train let out a breath. The wind attendant stepped down, trailing quiet behind it, and approached the glowing window. There was no knock, no explanation, just a gentle motion, lifting the suitcase and placing it on the windowsill like a gift left by the wind itself. The suitcase didn't shine, it didn't whisper, it simply waited. By the time the child rose and padded to the window, morning had begun to peek through the branches, not fully arrived but close enough to stir color from the dark. They saw it immediately. A small, worn suitcase, scuffed at the corners, without a tag or latch, no name to claim it, no message to explain it. But still, something about it meant, not like a surprise, more like something that had taken a long time to return home. The child touched it lightly. The leather was cool, but not cold. The clasp opened easily. Inside, there was no clutter, no piles, just space. A folded leaf rested in one corner, crisp, gently curled, holding the memory of hands that had shaped it. A petal lay in the center, faded pink, but still breathing faint traces of autumn's scent. It smelled like fireside stories and warm scarves, like walking back home after forgetting why you'd left. Next to it, a glow, not electric, not artificial, just a quiet light, like the warmth your hands keep when someone holds them for a while. And beyond that, space, not emptiness, space, room for something new. The child stood for a moment longer. Then, without speaking, without rushing, they placed their unfinished letter inside. The suitcase made no sound. It didn't shift or respond. But it held the letter with the same quiet care it had given everything else. It didn't ask questions. It didn't need to know why. It simply rested, steady, open, enough. And in the quiet that followed, the window held more than light. It held a beginning. The story has traveled far. It has curled through clouds, passed through snow, danced with fireflies, and listened to clocks that no longer tick. It has paused in stillness and stirred in silence. And now, like all good things, carried gently across the night, it finds its way to you. Not to teach, not to explain, just to rest. So let the voice soften now. Let it stop narrating and begin to whisper, not from a distance, but from somewhere close, close enough to feel like the hush just behind your breath. Not every story ends with fireworks or farewells. Some just find a quiet place to settle, like a warm object on your windowsill in the early morning mist, unmarked, unnamed, but waiting, because somehow it knows you've made space for it. Some nights, a suitcase will appear on your windowsill. It won't have a tag or ribbon. It might not even look important, but inside it might be something you forgot you needed. A folded leaf that still holds a season. A petal that carries the scent of someone who once held you tight. A light that doesn't shine for the world, only for you. It won't speak. But if you listen closely, you might hear something stir when you place your hand near it. A hum, a warmth, a breath that reminds you you were never truly empty. And if tonight you feel a little hollow, if your heart makes more echo than song, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just waiting to be opened the right way. The stars know how that feels. They wait too, quiet and high, shining softly without asking for attention, carrying stories in their glow. And when night is kind enough, even the stars exhale. So now, sleep. Let your thoughts drift like petals on slow water. Let your limbs loosen, your breath deepen. Let this voice curl beside you like a firefly too tired to glow, but still here, for even the nameless things are part of someone's dream. And now sleep, for even the stars need somewhere to rest. Sometimes we spend so much time looking for a name, a label, a reason to belong. But maybe, like the little suitcase, we're already enough, just as we are, quietly carrying pieces of memory, love, and light we don't even realize we hold. What do you think you might be carrying, even if you haven't opened it yet? If this story touched something inside you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to Night Radios for more dreamy journeys and gentle stories waiting just on the other side of sleep.